Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar will be Assessing Risk Management and Global Security with Dr. Joshua Sinai. I will introduce Dr. Sinai in just a moment after we handle a bit of housekeeping. I'd like to welcome everybody who's joined us. It's been fascinating to read in the text chat what your level of interest is and your professional background. I'd like to thank each of you for joining us today. Uh, Here's the agenda that we'll be following. We'll first talk just a little bit about capital, then have some housekeeping or session pointers. I'll introduce the presenter and then we'll get right into the presentation. That'll take the most of the time today. We'll allow time toward the end of the presentation for questions and answers, and then we'll talk a little bit about upcoming webinars. We host these every month, how to get a copy of the recording, slides, and a certificate of participation or attendance. By the way, I do want to remind everyone the session is being recorded, and we will make a copy of the recording available to you through a link, and also a copy of the slides available to you through a link. I seem to have problems getting my words out today, so bear with me. I maybe perhaps need one more cup of coffee. Anyway, I know that many of you, from looking at your names, and also you mentioned in the text chat that you are currently a student with us, so you know a great deal about capital. But for perhaps the few that don't, we were established in 1927, which means that we are one of the oldest technological-based universities in the United States, and we'll be celebrating our 100th anniversary in this decade. We're specifically dedicated to all things STEM, and this webinar is very clearly a part of that, and we're very pleased to present it to you. We're an accredited institution offering degrees all the way from associates up to, as you could see from the text chat, PhDs. Speaking of accreditation, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I do in every webinar have people tuning in from all over the world, and sometimes they don't really understand how American accreditation works. We're a nonprofit, private, and accredited university, and that basically means that we have the highest level of accreditation. We have regional accreditation, which is the highest level of accreditation available to any institution of higher learning in the United States. We're also authorized by the state of Maryland to confer degrees. Here are some housekeeping items just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. You can type in your question in the text chat at any time, but the bulk of the questions will actually be answered at the end of the presentation. We'll be watching and monitoring the text chat and put those questions to the presenter, and we'll answer just as many as we can in the hour that we have together. We're not activating microphones or webcams for participants today, so the way that you need to communicate with us is via the text chat. And as I mentioned, a link to the recording and to the slides will be sent to all registrants, and we'll also have that information available on our webinar webpage in a few days rather. A participation certificate is available upon request for both the live session and on-demand viewers. We have a lot of people who time shift the webinars and watch them at other times during the day or in the weeks ahead. And for those watching the recording or for those joining us in the live session, the certificate is available to you, and at the end of the presentation, we'll tell you how to obtain one. Let me talk just a little bit about our presenter, and then we'll get right into the presentation. Dr. Joshua Sinai is our presenter today. He's Professor of Practice in Intelligence and Global Security at Capital Technology University. Based in the Washington, D.C. area, Dr. Sinai has more than 35 years experience in international security, national security, and homeland security studies with the U.S. government, academia, and the corporate sector. He has worked for the U.S. Federal Research Division of the Library of Congress as a senior intelligence analyst, and for private sector firms such as doing contracting work in support of government agencies such as the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI's Foreign Terrorist Tracking Task Force. Say that 3 times fast. Foreign Terrorist Tracking Task Force. His book, Active Shooter, A Handbook on Prevention, published by ACES International in 2013 and expanded as a second edition in 2016, is a best-selling book on public safety that details active shooter incidents, preparation and prevention, and tactical responses. He's also authored or co-authored more than 50 scholarly articles. He earned his BA from State University of New York College at New Paltz and his MA and PhD from Columbia University in Political Science and Comparative Politics. It is a great joy to welcome Dr. Joshua Sinai to the session today. And with that, I'm going to give control to him and turn myself off.
Thank you very much, Bill. Can everyone hear me?
I think we can.
Oh, good. Thank you for attending the webinar. Nice to meet everyone. My email is provided at the end of the presentation, so please contact me for further information and also to be in touch. I gave a presentation on this topic about a year ago, so this presentation is a substantial revision and upgrade of what I put together then. So I hope you'll find it of interest. Next. This is a quick overview of risk management standards, publications, frameworks, and methodologies. While these are highly useful in understanding risk management, there is still a need for simple practical frameworks that can be easily applied. So this is what I've tried to come up with. Next. This is my approach to risk management in global security. It's one of the analytic methodologies we are applying in our Intelligence and Global Security Studies program at the university. First, we will define risk. Then we will assess overall risk to determine an entity's risk tolerance, ranging from low to high. Then we will prioritize risk mitigation measures for cost-benefit return on investment. And finally, the objective is to, once a risk management framework is applied, to attain overall resilience, which we define along 10 dimensions. Next. These are some of the significant risks in global security. I divided them into two categories, naturally caused and human caused. So among the naturally caused, as you know, there are pandemics, severe climate change in terms of hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts, also global warming and wildfires, although some of these are also human caused. What is common to all of these risks is that they can be anticipated and addressed preemptively before they occur through a risk management process. Next. What is risk in global security? Risk is defined as the likelihood and magnitude, the severity of the occurrence of an expected or unexpected future threatening event that can adversely impact the security of a country, a population, an organization, a company, or other entities. So it can be applied to a spectrum of potential threats. Next. In a risk management estimation, risk is a function of a threat of an attack, vulnerability to be attacked, and the consequence of being attacked. An effective risk management process will ideally succeed in mitigating overall risk. Next. This is how the risk management framework works. I've broken down threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences into their components. So those would be under threats. History refers to the occurrence of similar types of threats in the past, an intent by a threat actor to attack, a capability to attack, the likely targets to be attacked, the attack mode in terms of tactics, weapons, etc., and local presence to carry out an attack. If there's no local presence, then there is a very low likelihood of a potential attack. In terms of vulnerabilities, should look at the criticality and attractiveness of a target to be attacked, the access to be attacked, the lack of defense to be attacked, the lack of deterrence to prevent a potential attacker from attacking, and also non-compliance with laws and regulations, which is a huge vulnerability, such as the presence of an emergency response operations plan. By the way, there are many more components that need to be looked at. And in terms of consequences of being attacked, we look at the human consequences in terms of death and injury, the psychological impacts, physical damages, financial liability, legal liability, the impact on an entity's competitive advantage due to the damages incurred, and the impact on the country's national security. Next. There are various ways of calculating risk in terms of the threat, vulnerability, and consequence. One way is to come up with a 5-point scale ranging from negligible, low, medium, high, or critical. And then the objective of applying risk management framework to anticipate future threats is that it will enable the potential target to preemptively prevent and mitigate their impacts if they were to occur. And I'll elaborate on this in the presentation. Next. In this presentation, I will apply the risk management framework to recent catastrophes. In the cases of the Maui wildfires, Hamas's attack across the border, and to a potential catastrophe that might result from the widespread use of artificial intelligence. What sort of future risks should we anticipate? So I've come up with an illustrative listing of 8 risk issues that need to be considered. Next. In Maui, on August 8th, the wildfires began in the grassy hillside area above Lahaina, a 13,000-person town on the island's northwest coast. It was caused by a combination of fast winds by a Category 4 hurricane near the islands, which knocked out power of the state's biggest utility company, with wind-driven fires causing widespread damage to drought-filled grassy areas. At least 115 people were killed, 67 injured, some 2,200 acres were burnt. By the way, this is a rough estimate. And again, more than 2,200 buildings were destroyed, again an estimate, which were mostly residential, displacing an estimated 6,000 inhabitants. The total damage was reported at between $5.5 billion and $6 billion. The wireless emergency alert system didn't function because of high winds, power outages, and flames that took out the cell service network. Next. As you see, the wildfires caused massive devastation. Next. Note that this information is for illustrative purposes to demonstrate how the framework works. I'm in the process of writing an article that will elaborate on this material in greater detail, including providing citations. Now, in terms of history, climate change had caused the region burnt by wildfire to increase fivefold since the 1980s. The number of fire incidents had increased over the years, affecting 50,000 acres in 2019. While hurricane landfalls are rare, brushes by tropical systems are common in Hawaii and Maui. Now, in terms of intent, the combination of strong hurricane winds and dry conditions on the ground served to cause wildfires. In terms of capability, the wind whipped fires spread swiftly and created a deadly tinderbox. Likely targets were the grassy hillside area above Lahaina and the drought-filled grassy areas around it. The attack mode was a combination of strong hurricane winds and dry conditions on the ground. And in terms of local presence, hurricane landfalls are rare, but brushes by tropical systems are common. Next. In terms of vulnerabilities, in terms of criticality and attractiveness, you could say that they were caused by hot and drought-like weather conditions, foothills covered in dry invasive grasses that are highly flammable, so they were attractive to wildfires. In terms of access, the foothills were covered in dry invasive grasses that are highly inflammable. There was a lack of defense. Foothills were covered in highly flammable dry invasive grasses. Hawaii spends less than other states on wildfire prevention and response. Annual budgeting of $3.2 million, about $2 per resident, as opposed to California's spending of $21 per resident. So this was a huge vulnerability. There was also a lack of deterrence. There was limited available water supply to put out the wildfires. The decline in agriculture, land use, reduced maintenance and access to roads, water sources, equipment, and assistance, which previously supported firefighting. And there was also a high degree of non-compliance with laws and regulations. Most of the communities lacked well-developed and comprehensive emergency preparedness and disaster response plans. Residents were never trained on how to leave town in the event of a fast-evolving wildfire. Hawaii was the only state without a state fire marshal. Hawaii Electric lacked maintenance plans, and there were flaws in the evacuation plan, particularly in early detection and response. Next. In terms of consequences, there were at least 115 people killed, 67 injured, 6,000 people were displaced. More than 2,200 acres were burnt. There was a huge financial liability, an estimated $5.5 to $6 billion cost to rebuild Maui. More than 800 businesses needed to be rebuilt. There was enormous legal liability. The state of Hawaii and the electric industries company faced massive potential liabilities. Insurance companies had to pay out more than $1 billion for residential damage claims. More than 100 insurance companies filed suit against the state. In terms of competitive advantage, with tourism a major industry generating 80% of Maui's economic revenue, in 2023, there was more than a 50% decline in tourist visitors. There was actually a negligible impact on national security. Now, I also examine problems that occurred prior to a major incident. So prior to August 23, risk management problems were extensive. In 2021, a county report found that the island was at severe risk for wildfire. In times of emergency, the limited roads in and out of Maui, making it difficult to provide emergency care, limited escape routes, budgets were inadequate for effective fire prevention, and sirens were only announced for tsunami warnings, not for wildfires. And in terms of risk management solutions, which are now being worked on, there are reports that they are improving evacuation plans, managing dry vegetation around towns and homes via defensible space, promoting strategic undergrounding of utility lines in priority fire hazard risk areas. Cities are now installing siren networks that can broadcast pre-recorded voice messages. And resources are being provided for post-fire rehabilitation efforts to hopefully prevent such a catastrophe from occurring again. Next. Now, on October 7th, 2023, as you know, in a coordinated surprise attack, an estimated 3,000 Hamas fighters easily breached the supposedly fortified border fence along the Gaza border and attacked bordering Gush Katif, harvest block towns and kibbutzim. More than 1,400 Israelis were killed. Around 1,500 Hamas attackers were eventually killed by the responding Israeli forces, but who arrived several hours after the attack had begun. It was considered an enormous failure. 200 Israeli hostages were taken into Gaza, and reportedly Hamas's leaders were surprised by the weakness of Israel's defenses. The attack represented for Hamas a strategic, operational, and tactical paradigm transformation. And in response, Israel's cabinet declared war on Hamas, now in its 6th month and showing no sign of ending. Next. In terms of threats, in the past, limited wars were fought between Israel and Hamas in December 2008, November 2012, in 2014, and again in May 2021. But these were limited wars. In terms of intent, the attack might have been intended to provoke a disproportionate response from Israel that would lead to Hamas's regional allies such as Iran, Hezbollah, and the Houthis to join the war against Israel. It was intended to disrupt Arab-Israeli normalization initiatives. Like, we're not going to take into account the future of the Palestinians in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. They were intended to bolster Hamas's domestic, regional, and international position. And they were intended to use Israeli hostages as leverage for the release of more than 1,000 Palestinian security prisoners. And in terms of capability, Hamas reportedly had some 30,000 fighters, a large arsenal of rockets, firearms, and drones. Hamas was known to construct a massive network of underground tunnels, including several leading into Israel. And prior to October 23, Hamas conducted several military war games that were actually known to Israel. In fact, a document attesting to it was uncovered by Israeli intelligence more than a year earlier, but was not taken seriously. And the last war game, Hamas war game, took place in September 23, in which they practiced hostage-taking, raiding compounds, and breaching Israel defenses. But these were not taken seriously. And in terms of local presence, Hamas ruled the Gaza Strip, and they had a militant infrastructure in the West Bank. In terms of Israel's next, In terms of vulnerabilities on Israel's side, in terms of attractiveness and criticality, the Netanyahu's coalition government's focus on undermining the independence of the country's judicial system led to months of domestic political turmoil, which military leaders had complained was weakening the country's security. For Hamas, massively attacking Gush Katif and its residents represented a relatively easy way to severely punish Israel and achieve its overall objectives. In terms of access, with Israel's security forces focusing on defending the country's West Bank settlements, there was inadequate security presence along the Gaza border, enabling Hamas fighters to easily breach the security fence and gain access to the neighboring towns and kibbutzim. There was a lack of defense on Israel's part. There was a high dependency on high-tech surveillance to provide early warning alerts, but it led to complacency on Israel's part and insufficient deployment of troops to protect the border fence at all times. Israel's surveillance technologies were bypassed by Hamas's leaders and operatives who communicated offline. And due to the Jewish holiday and the Sabbath, many Israeli troops were at home, while others were relocated to support operations in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. And there was also a lack of deterrence on Israel's part, because it took some 6 to 8 hours for Israeli troops to arrive in Gush Katif to defeat and neutralize the attacking Hamas operatives. Next, in terms of consequences, with more than 1,000 Israelis, mostly civilians, killed by Hamas's fighters. And since then, an additional 250 IDF soldiers were killed in the fighting. As of March 24, an estimated 3,000 soldiers have been wounded. More than 100 Israeli hostages continued to be held by Hamas, with some of them reported to be dead. An estimated 200,000 to 250,000 Israelis have been internally displaced, who had lived in the communities near the Gaza Strip and along the border with Lebanon. This was a huge devastation for Israel. In terms of financial economic liability, it had a devastating impact on the Israeli economy, costing it an estimated $600 million a week, due to factors such as military reserve duty leading to work absences, sharp decline in tourism, the absence of some 125,000 Palestinian and foreign workers has led to a decline in output in the agricultural and construction sectors. In terms of legal liability, in its January decision, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to prevent acts of genocide in Gaza, which many people felt was unfair, but still it's a liability that Israel has to recognize. And there are several nations who are considering arresting IDF soldiers who are visiting their countries. And they're also considering limiting arms sales to Israel. And in terms of national security, Israel has been accustomed to waging relatively quick wars. And this is the first time it has been forced to fight a 6-month war without securing a quick and decisive victory. And Israeli deterrence is still unable to pressure Hamas to release the remaining hostages. Next. Now, apparently a risk management framework has never been used in Israeli national security, whether at the government or even the academic levels. In fact, 3 weeks prior to the attack, a major annual conference on counterterrorism was held in Herzliya, Israel, at the Institute for Counterterrorism. And the highlight of their proceedings was the potential use of artificial intelligence by terrorists. Nothing was discussed about security along the Gaza border. And other threats. And as I had mentioned earlier, more than a year before the attack, the IDF gained possession of its attack plan, a 40-page battle plan. But Hamas's plan was dismissed as too difficult for it to carry out. And top IDF commanders also ignored and played down warnings, such as weeks before the attacks, female surveillance soldiers near the border reportedly warned but were ignored of unusually high drone activity and that Hamas was training to take over the observation posts. And 6 hours prior to the attack, IDF detected that hundreds of Hamas operatives had switched to Israeli SIM cards, but this report was downplayed. And despite Israeli intelligence warnings, the IDF didn't warn and evacuate the Nova Festival organizers and the several hundred partygoers of an imminent threat. Now, in terms of risk management solutions, Israel needs to apply a robust risk management framework to prevent future catastrophes along all counterterrorism fronts. And the IDF's military operation in Gaza still requires the political echelon to formulate a strategic end state for the day after, which, as you know, the Netanyahu government is actually refusing to do, despite being urged by the Biden administration to come up with a coherent end state for the day after. So risk management represents a huge problem for Israeli national security. Next, I'm going to go over this relatively quickly. Potential risks in the application of artificial intelligence, according to the literature, include critical infrastructure security, digital security, economic financial security. Trading algorithms might incorrectly interpret new market circumstances, leading to volatile markets. There are legal and compliance issues, for example, concerning liability and intellectual property rights, copyright infringement of paid content. AI firms might demand compensation for use of their AI data in users' patents. There have already been several faulty legal briefs based on AI. In terms of national security, malicious state and non-state actors would utilize AI cyber tools for cyber breaches. Also, AI-enabled autonomous weapons could be used by malicious actors. In terms of physical safety, autonomous vehicles might malfunction. Machine learning models might diagnose medical conditions. In terms of political security, deep fakes are already spreading disinformation to distort and manipulate political reality. And there's a need for transparency and accountability in the application of AI, including, according to some, a bias and discrimination in the use of AI in facial recognition. Next. There are several ways of calculating overall risk. To be honest, I still haven't come up with a formula that is practical. Next. In terms of calculating risk tolerance, first, the risk categories need to be assessed, challenging an entity. Risk category scenarios need to be formulated. Second, these risks need to be prioritized in their significance to an entity's capability to function efficiently. Third, an entity's risk tolerance needs to be calculated by establishing a threshold for how much damage impact from the assessed risk is acceptable or unacceptable. And fourth, the risk tolerance framework needs to be revisited on a regular basis to track new risks and if former risks change. Next. risks need to be prioritized strategically in terms of their mitigation, strategically, operationally, and tactically. I'm going over this quickly because I'd like to leave plenty of room for Q&A. Next. So the objective is to attain resilience following disasters. Next. Resilience can be assessed according to these 10 dimensions. Next. And the risk management framework offers numerous benefits. It produces a structured framework for informing decision makers to assess overall risk appetite, and prioritize the allocation of resources to mitigate them. It generates a cost-benefit return on investment. It can lower insurance risk premiums, maintain competitive national security and business advantage. And in the best case scenario, effectively applying this framework will upgrade the overall resilience of the threatened country, corporation, or another entity that engages in risk management and risk mitigation. Next. I hope that this has been useful, and I look forward to your questions and discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Sinai. Wow, I was fascinated with both the Hawaii fires and the Hamas attack and the detail that you presented there. Let's open the discussion now. And again, as I want to remind everybody, we are recording the session. I know a few people joined us late. The whole session is being recorded, so you can feel free to go back and catch the portions of it that you missed. Now, let's start back with the questions, and I encourage you to go ahead and type in additional questions as well. John Norris began actually right at the very beginning of your presentation asking that you cover a little more detail on infectious disease risk and management and bioterrorism. So
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yes, yeah. Actually, John is actually a good friend and a leading expert practitioner in infectious diseases. So yes, the risk management framework should have been applied prior to the late 2019 outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, so the same framework could have been used to assess the threat, the vulnerabilities, and the consequences of such a pandemic, in order to come up with an overall risk score, and then to prioritize all the mitigation measures. So yes, so when I write my article, I'm going to include pandemics as one of the case studies, the application of this risk framework.
Thank you. Raghu asked several questions, and we'll just take them individually as they come up. He first asks, when a vulnerability festers and remains unresolved for an extended period of time, does the associated risks grow, or do they grow?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and something I should have pointed out. If there is a very low vulnerability to be attacked, then the overall risk would be substantially lower. You can have a threat actor intent on carrying out a major attack, but if the target is hardened and difficult to attack, then one would score the threat as low or negligible. So yes. So that's why it is so important to upgrade a potential target's vulnerability to be attacked. it will lower the threat and also lower the consequence of a potential attack. So yes, actually, and I'm glad you pointed that out because I'm going to add it to my next revision. Thanks.
Yeah, it is interesting when you think about it that sometimes a known threat seems to dissolve into the woodwork because you're not paying
Yes.
attention to it anymore, but
Mhm.
it's still just as bad. In fact, it may be growing, but you're so used to seeing it that you're not paying attention to it anymore. It just becomes part of the scenery. Okay,
Yes,
another
I
question.
just wanted to add that I follow Israeli news regularly on the internet, and for months prior to October, um, national security experts kept warning that the domestic turmoil in Israel was going to be exploited by Hezbollah and Hamas. So this was known months and weeks prior to the attack.
It's yeah, I know it could carry on quite a
Yeah.
conversation just about that, that's for sure. Let me go on to other additional questions. Are there publicly accessible databases that provide credible information about terrorist incidents? This is from Raghu again.
Yes, but one problem in the terrorism discipline is that there is confusion about how to define terrorism, which affects how terrorist incident databases are populated. In my definition, terrorism consists of attacks against armed military and law enforcement and unarmed civilians. In the conventional definition, they only focus on attacks against unarmed civilians, not the military. So the incident databases are skewed and don't reflect the full magnitude of the terrorist threat challenging a country. So I actually haven't found any terrorist incident databases that are completely authoritative. So you have to pretty much put together your own database in order to assess the magnitude of a terrorist threat facing a country.
Thank you. I'm going to skip ahead to Paul's question. Raghu had another question, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance here. He does mention that this is a very helpful framework for him and his own research, but he also mentioned a question. Do you believe that artificial intelligence and machine learning can be used to update risks as they change? It's interesting because you've just been discussing AI as a possible threat, and yet he is saying here AI could actually be part of the solution at the same time.
Yes, yes. So for quite a while, I've been hoping that some kind of artificial intelligence algorithm could be used to populate terrorist incident databases. Um, well, at least we should give it a try, and then see how authoritative the findings are. So yes, so it does have tremendous potential to upgrade capability to put together authoritatively populated terrorist incident databases.
Sounds like a perfect PhD project or dissertation to me.
Yes, yes.
Okay, Scott says it's interesting to note that there is not a practical risk calculation that Dr. Sinai finds useful. In my industry, healthcare, we struggle with assigning a risk score for cyber security vulnerabilities. What seems to be gaining popularity is the use of exploitability as a measure of likelihood versus probability. Any thoughts on this?
Oh, yeah, so the threat actors are always looking for new vulnerabilities in the targeted adversary to exploit. So that's why a targeted country, corporation or organization or other entity always needs to formulate alternative threat scenarios to address. So it's a continuous process. So that needs to be regularly updated and revised. So some of the methods that are used are red teaming, coming up with competing alternative future scenarios, and so on. So yes, it's crucial to come up with as many alternative future scenarios as possible in terms of best case, worst case, likely, or wild cards. And in order to ensure that if something does occur, it will already have been anticipated.
This is not a question that has been asked in the chat. As far as I know, I haven't looked at all of them, but I'm just curious, do insurance companies obviously pay very close attention to risk, obviously, but do they have on their staffs people such as yourself who are risks and analyzers and could determine if a particular major insurance investment is really worth the risk to them?
Yes, my understanding is that they do employ risk analysts. In fact, after 2002, I was asked by a major risk premium company, Applied Insurance Research, to put together a team to assess the terrorism threats, and we came up with a score that they used to base their terrorism risk premiums against.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
but our team hasn't been called back in recent years, so I'm a little upset with AIR.
Yeah. Now back to the questions. You mentioned climate change earlier, and Nijia asked the question, how can a country begin to retroactively implement risk management for natural risks? I'm thinking of the boreal Canadian wildfire fires.
Yes.
And it's now affecting lives. So your comment on that, and of course that impacts the global, partly it's because of global warming that this is happening, but other factors may come into play as well.
Yes, so various international organizations, I can't think of them right now, have been, including the World Economic Forum, have been issuing reports on the risks associated with climate change. And I think, was it in, when the Paris Accords were reached, that called for the international community to lower emissions to a certain level. So, yeah, the international community is trying to address these threats, but it has been very uneven because not every country is consenting to do as much as is needed to address the threat associated with climate change.
Thank you. Keith asked this question, and it's a little bit on the technical side, so you may be wanting to look at it at the same time I am. He says, I am a cybersecurity professional and was curious whether the risk management framework you're referring to is the same framework I implement in cybersecurity using the NIST publications.
Yeah, so I've looked at some of the NIST publications, but I found them very difficult to operationalize in a user-friendly way. So that's why we have come up with our own simplified framework. So if someone could explain to me how the NIST framework can be easily applied, I'd very much appreciate it.
It sounds to me like there are people on the call today that could potentially do that for you. Maybe some of
Yes.
your own students that are working in that area. I'm going to return to the question that Raghu asked earlier, and I wanted to return to it now. He says, and it's an intriguing question, as nations increasingly connect their critical infrastructures such as power grids, oil pipelines, water supply, traffic controls, hospitals, to computer systems and the internet, are the risks of cybersecurity recognized by infrastructure executives and managers? So that, and you could expand that to talk about the entire Internet of Things and the
Mm-hmm.
risk that's associated with everybody and everything being so connected all the time.
Yeah, I mean, although I don't have any inside information, but um, reportedly, U.S. government agencies such as CISA um, are continuously examining the risks associated with the Internet of Things, the interconnected sectors in the critical infrastructure, and so on and so on. So yes, this is being addressed at the U.S. government level, and also at the industry level by the various associations uh, that represented the different sectors in the critical infrastructure. Yeah, so this is continuously being addressed.
It is interesting when you think about it that earlier you were discussing in the framework the concept of local presence.
Mm-hmm.
And with cyber hacking, there is no local presence. And so you now expanded to the entire world the potential for risk that's available. Okay,
Right,
I
and
see
I'd just like to address that. Actually, there is a local presence because there's the potential for insiders to carry out a malicious hacking attack against their organizations.
well,
So,
that's an excellent
yeah,
point. Yes, because often that is the source. And that there is some local presence at work in it that has opened the door, if you will,
yes.
or opened the back door. Okay, I think I'm looking at the time now. We are now at 12:52, and we like to go ahead and draw it up. So I'm going to let you take this final question from John Norris. It'll be our last one. Might bio threats and bio ransomware threats outpace eventually cyber threats and cyber ransomware threats in the future?
That's a very interesting question. And I guess that's where a targeted entity would need to prioritize the risks challenging it and give it a weighted score. So that could be a very interesting exercise for a government organization to conduct, to give a weighted score to the spectrum of risks facing it, ranging from pandemics to cyber, and so on and so on.
Yes, I think that that would be true of many things, would it not? Because for every business and for nations, there's not an unlimited amount of physical resources to handle those threats, and it must be a prioritization of it. So that's where your framework comes in very handy, because it would determine what the highest threats and the consequences of those threats would be.
Yes, and and the vulnerabilities that they need to observe and address.
Exactly. Yeah. If they can mitigate the vulnerabilities, then they're going to mitigate the threat at the
Yes,
same time.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to go on and we're nearly done with the presentation. I want to remind everybody that if you have continuing discussion with Dr. Sinai, feel free to reach out to him via the email that he provided in the previous slide, and he'll be happy to continue to dialogue with you on that. I want to move ahead in a few moments that we have together to talk about our upcoming webinars. We have one every month through the month of June. I've listed the April and May one. Next month on April 18th, Dr. Kolochenko will discuss cyber law and cybercrime investigation, very much in fitting with what we've just been discussing. And then on May 23rd, Dr. Alexander Perry will be discussing Introduction to Hybrid Quantum Classical Machine Learning. Please do not ask me what he'll cover because I'm not sure exactly what that means. But quantum learning and quantum machining interaction is a very big thing right now. I think you'll enjoy that presentation for those interested in that topic. There is a presentation for June that we'll discuss next month. Let me move ahead here to the next slide. To register for webinars or to view any on-demand webinar, and we have quite an inventory of on-demand webinars for you to review, just go to captechu.edu/webinar-series, and you can register or watch any of our existing sessions. And I do want to mention too that Capital offers regionally accredited online undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degrees in counterterrorism and intelligence and global security. And these are programs managed by Dr. Sinai. If you're interested in any possible, and I noticed several students who are actually in that program right now at the PhD level, but feel free to reach out to our admissions department or directly to Dr. Sinai if you have an interest in a professional degree related to that. Now, finally, here's our, we're nearly done here. The links to the slides in the recording is going to be sent to everybody who's registered. So if you registered for this session, you'll be getting an email. If you would like to have a certificate of completion, simply respond to that email, and don't do it in the text chat now, but just simply respond to it in the email and I will be happy to send it to you. And again, this applies to both people attending the live session now and for those who view the session on demand later on. With that, that concludes our today's webinar, and I do want to encourage you to watch for that email and be sure to reach out to Dr. Sinai if you have additional questions that you'd like to follow up with. And again, I want to give a shout out to those PhD members who, or candidates, I should say, who've joined us today and contributed to the questions and to the conversation. It's been a pleasure. Again, I'll be sending out an email and show you how to get the participation certificate. I'll be happy to get that sent to you. With that, we will conclude. I'd like to thank our presenter. It's been fascinating today, Dr. Sinai. I'm just amazed at the detail that you put together for this presentation. So with that, thank you all, and you all have a good